push of Jimmy and Ken. Apps that are sandboxed and will run for a check is the hope of Candace and Jen. And the SecOps team
So,
can hardly
good
wait
morning,
for
good afternoon,
stable
good
weekend.
evening, wherever you are.
It's
Thank you for
beginning to
joining
look a
the
lot
session,
like
the
a data
Meet vRx Holiday Edition. Great to have you all here. Looking forward to running through a brief session just to give you an intro into vRx. But first of all, just to kick off, just a little intro to me. So my name's David Gray, so I'm Solution Architect Team Lead for Vicarious for EMEA. So I cover everything from a technical perspective. In the past, I've been in the industry for more than 20 years. In the past, I've worked for a value-added reseller in the UK for a long time, managing the technical team. And now the last 2.5 years or so, working with Vicarious, working with partners, working with customers across the region. So today, the aim really, it's just to give you a very brief introduction to the vRx platform, to give you an idea of how the platform works, what we can do with it, how we can optimize operations and save time with the use of the platform. While I'm going through this, please do feel free, ask any questions, and of course we can cover those off towards the end of the session. I'll aim to take around about 20-25 minutes, and if you find it's interesting, we can of course schedule further sessions. We can I can go through more detail, a more detailed demo, or my colleagues in different regions as needed. So what I'll do is, without further ado, I shall get started with the demo and give you a taster into the platform. So I'll just bring that up now. Okay, yeah, I think we'll stick with that view. So vRx, if you're not familiar with what vRx actually is, just from a high level, we're essentially focused on vulnerability remediation. So it's vulnerability assessment. We then do risk prioritization and remediation. So we're about managing the entire life cycle of the vulnerabilities and the risk management and the remediation of those vulnerabilities. So what you can actually see in front of you is the dashboard that you would see when you log into the platform. So we're really designed to give you overview into the environment. So what we're looking at is information about the applications, the assets, the operating systems that you're managing. We're also highlighting any new applications. We're highlighting new assets as we identify them. And all of these items on the main dashboard, you can click, you can drill down into additional dashboards. So you've got different perspectives on the information that we're viewing from this main screen. We have information about the risk level of the assets, so we can see high, medium, or low risk. We've also got information about the assets and whether they're online or offline. And you can see down at the bottom of the screen here, we have vulnerability trend information. So you can see detection and mitigation events while we're focusing on the vulnerability events and the CVEs. And you can also see right down at the bottom, we have a breakdown of the vulnerabilities and the threats as we've identified them across the various severities here. So just taking a slight step back, the way we actually operate is we have an agent-based platform. So we have agents that we run on all of the managed endpoints. So we're running on Windows, we're running on Mac, we're running on Linux. And you can see here we've got Windows, Mac, Linux devices, a variety of different platforms. We've got some Red Hat, we've got Mac, we've got Windows servers, and so on. The agent we can deploy really easily through a number of different deployment mechanisms. We can work with all sorts of existing tools that you might have. For example, Intune. We work with lots of customers using Intune for deployment. The agent, we then have a cloud-based backend. So as long as that agent has connectivity to the internet, you can manage the assets wherever they might be. So that's whether you're on-premise, whether you've got cloud-based assets, virtual machines, or whether you've got users working from home. The agent Once we install, then starts to perform an inventory of that managed endpoint. So we're looking at, we start off with some of the basic information around IP addresses. We're looking at some other information around maybe the last logged in user, or domain name, organizational unit. We also look at some hardware information, so maybe motherboard or BIOS information, for example. So we retrieve a fair few different pieces of information. We then start to look at information around the operating system and the applications that are installed. So we have a large array, a large catalog of assets of applications that we do manage through the platform. So you can see here, we've got quite a few third-party applications that we're already identifying here: Wireshark, Chrome, VirtualBox, 7-zip, so on. From there, what we then do is we then look to identify information about any updates that might be available, both operating system and applications. And you can see from here, we could actually start to remediate, and you could actually start to apply updates from this screen. Essentially, we've got different ways that we can go in to manage the platform and to manage the remediation activities. From there, what we then do is we then look to identify the vulnerabilities and the CVEs that are present on the endpoint. So that's really looking at the vulnerabilities to identify, are they present right now or not? So what we can do, because it's a cloud-based dashboard, we can see on a near real-time basis whether the vulnerabilities are relevant or not to the managed endpoints. So as new CVEs are published, we know within an hour or so whether they're relevant or not. Equally, when you apply a patch, we know that they've now been fixed. Now, that cloud-based dashboard, incidentally, we do have different hosting locations globally, depending on where you might be based. So we've got hosting locations, US, Europe, and Asia Pacific, depending on requirements. So from that vulnerability information, we then start to build a bigger picture, and you can start to drill down into looking at what those vulnerabilities actually are within the dashboard. And you can see here, when we look at the active vulnerabilities, you can see we have the different severities identified. We have various filters that you can use to really narrow down the data when looking at the vulnerabilities and the CVEs. And you can see, obviously, we've carried through that filter from the previous screen that we're looking at this specific asset. So in terms of the vulnerabilities, if we wanted to focus on the critical, we could maybe do that based around the critical, and we can also filter to see what's most prevalent, as well as looking at additional information to really understand what does that vulnerability mean. So we have a great deal of information around those vulnerabilities. However, that said, what we're actually aiming to do is to simplify that management and take away the process from looking at the thousands or tens of thousands of CVEs. So you can see here in my test environment, for example, we've got more than 3,000 vulnerabilities with only 32 assets. As soon as we start to multiply that up, you're talking about, as I'm sure you're aware, and I'm sure you see in your own environments, tens of thousands of CVEs. Nigh on impossible to manage. Great big spreadsheets, long lists of vulnerabilities. So what we're actually aiming to do is to simplify that process, to take more of a risk-based approach rather than each individual CVE. So this is where the risk in terms of the asset, the high, the medium, and the low, and the risk in terms of the applications, again, high, medium, and low, come into play. So we're aiming to help you focus on reducing risk by focusing in on the higher risk applications or the higher risk assets. The way we do it is through the use of what we call X tags. So what we do is we perform a contextual analysis. And by that, I mean, we look at the CVSS score, but we also look at other threat information feeds. So we're looking at maybe, for example, whether we have known exploited vulnerabilities, of course, whether we have known vulnerabilities, but also on a dynamic basis, we're looking at how the applications are used. So we're looking at maybe whether we have frequently used applications. Do they need admin rights to run? Are they active on the network? And on a slightly less dynamic basis, we're looking at information like whether we have patches available. We're looking at maybe social media activity around those vulnerabilities. We're also looking at whether we have certain types of exposure. So, for example, whether we're exposed to denial of service attacks or maybe RCE attacks. So we use all of these X tags in conjunction to generate the risk score. And this is how we come up with the high, the medium, and the low risk to help you focus where you can really reduce risk. What we can then do is start to move more into a remediation phase. So we can start to look at how you can then reduce the risk. And what we can do is you can use filters. So you can use these X tags to apply a filter for maybe seeing whether we have any patches available. So we can see here that we have, for example, 8 high-risk applications that we have patches available for right now. But we can also combine these. So maybe if we're interested in looking at whether we have known exploited vulnerabilities and patches available, we can use that. So we can see here we have 6 high-risk applications that we have patch available, but we also have known exploited vulnerabilities. And equally, we have 5 medium risk. So again, we have patches available and we've got known exploited vulnerabilities. They're really good candidates to start doing something with, start fixing, and a quick, easy win. So you can start to drill down to look at those applications. So we can come through to the software dashboard where we've got the applications and the operating systems. And again, you can see we've got a number of different filters. So we can filter asset groups, asset names, the X tags that we've carried through from the previous screen. We can filter on particular CVEs. So if we want to see are certain CVEs associated with certain applications, we can do that. And of course, you can search for the applications. For each of the applications, we then also give additional information around, for example, the recommended treatment steps. So typically it will be apply a patch if we have any available, but we've got other actions that we can take where patches aren't available. We also provide an analysis in terms of understanding why we're saying the application is high risk in this instance. So these are the X tags that are coming into play. These are what's contributing to the risk score. This is why we're saying it's high risk. So again, we can see these different X tags contributing to the risk score. So for example, here we have a patch available, as we know. We also have information about the versions. So you can see what we have within the environment, where it's installed, and any associated vulnerabilities. And on the vulnerabilities, just coming back to that again, we do have that additional information again, coming from a slightly different perspective, this time looking more from an application perspective rather than the asset. But again, we can see more detail around what does that vulnerability actually mean, together with links through to our vSociety website, where we have additional information and links to vendor advisories and so on. Excuse me. So coming back to the recommended treatment, what we can then do is we can then start to look at the remediation. So how do we start reducing the risk? And this is where we come through to the patch management area, which we also have a dedicated patch management dashboard over on the left here. But what we can do is we can select the patch or patches that you want to apply, hit update. We then start to step through. You'll see in a moment this will update. These will be populated from previous screens. So VLC will be selected. The patches that I chose previous screen already selected. Also associated assets. By default, we run now, or we can schedule perhaps for some point in the future. Hit finish. We then provide a summary of the activity, and that then pushes those patches out. So within literally 3 or 4 clicks of the home dashboard, we're already applying patches and remediating those vulnerabilities and the risk on those applications and the assets. So that's all well and good on a manual basis. But again, what we want to do is we want to help you reduce the amount of time and effort that you're putting into patching, putting into the remediation. So we can automate this. So what we can do is build an automation around these activities, and we can base this around application updates, operating system updates, or we can run scripts or various other activities. If we look at the application updates, what we can do is you can select either those that we've got updates for right now, or more usefully, we can select all applications we've seen within the environment. So you can choose multiple applications. Whether we've got patches available or not. So maybe we want to focus on browsers, maybe set up a group for web browsers to apply patches, or productivity applications. Lots of different ways that we can set this up. The key is that we can select these applications for future patching. And the way we do that is through using the severity level. So you can focus in on, maybe we want to apply critical and high on a more regular basis, daily. And maybe we just want to apply the medium and low on a less frequent basis, so maybe monthly. Or you can just do everything all together. But basically the principle is that you can choose the severity levels that you want to manage for updating. We can then set, if a reboot is required, more often for OS than applications, we can set that to take place either immediately or some point in the future. You can also allow user interaction in terms of cancelling, restart if it's needed, or snoozing, or we can add customized messaging to keep users informed with pop-ups to let them know what's actually happening. We can then choose the asset or the asset group that you're wanting to deploy to. So we can push out to test systems before production systems, or servers or workstations, head office, branch office, lots of different ways that we can set the groups up. The groupings, what we can do is we can use lots of different dynamic filters, basically. We can then specify the schedule. So when do we want to run? Do you want to run daily, weekly, monthly, or a custom basis? Maybe we want to run every second Wednesday of the month. And what time do we want to run? Do you want to run out of hours? Do you want to run that maybe during working hours? So that if we set for maybe 8 in the morning through till 5 p.m., if a system comes online during the working day, do we want that asset to pick up the automation, to pick up the updates, to pick up the new versions of the application? There's lots of flexibility there. And for larger organizations, we can do a rolling execution. So break it down into subsets of assets so that we can do a staggered and staged rollout over a period of time. We can also combine this. So you could add in other activities. So maybe we want to do the OS updates, which essentially look identical to the applications. We can choose the OSs that we're interested in, and again, the severity levels that we're interested in. We can add in scripts, so that you can run scripts before or after, or we can run those. We can run those completely separately and independently. In terms of the scripts, what we can do is we have a library that we're publishing on a regular, ongoing basis. So they typically focus on vulnerabilities in terms of configuration type vulnerabilities. So if you think log4j. And we have detection and remediation scripts that we publish. We also have operational activities so that we can retrieve information. So I have a team who are creating these scripts, publishing them. And I think we're probably going to be nudging over 1,000 by the time we get to the new year. You can also create your own scripts, and there's lots of different things you can do. Basically, if you can script, if you can script it, you can run through the platform. So, for example, one of the things that I've done is I can uninstall software, create a restore point. We can install software, so we can actually upload files to install software. Essentially, the key with the scripting is that it's really, really flexible in terms of what we can actually do. Now, for all of these activities, what we also have is a full set of activity logging and event logs. I'm not going to go into those right now. Time doesn't really permit, but we have logging so that you can see the status, so that you can see the activities and the actions, success or failure or otherwise. I think a couple of the other areas that I do want to touch on before I can see there's some questions coming in. Just before I move on to that, there was couple of other items that I just want to touch on very, very briefly. One is the asset grouping, which I mentioned before, which I think is really important to talk about briefly. In terms of the asset grouping, the asset groups are dynamic, so systems come in and out based on filters. Assets can exist in multiple groups. We can base around lots of different things. So we can base around, for example, we have a status of pending reboot, so we can put the systems into a group, schedule a restart for a time of your choosing, out of hours. We can base around asset name, application name, whether we have applications installed or whether we do not have applications installed. We can use operating systems, IP address, domain name, organizational unit, AD group, and you can create custom tags. So lots and lots of flexibility in terms of the grouping. And in terms of the dashboards, what we can then do is we can use those to reflect, for example, on the main dashboard, we can see what's the risk status of this particular group. So you can see that the dashboard dynamically updates to reflect that. And we also have, in turn, we can use these teams to create, or the groups to create teams so that we can have role-based access controls, so that we can manage who has access to which systems, and we can manage those processes. So there's lots of options there in terms of the way that we can manage. Now, one of the things that we also have that I think, just having a quick scan through the questions. So we're talking about logging. So one of the things that we do have, so Lucas, you're asking about the controls around logging and auditing. So we do, of course, have that. So in terms of logging, we have our activity log. So I will come into that now. I know I said I wasn't going to. So we've got the logging in terms of what we're covering in the automations. So we can see the success or failure on different devices. We also then, in terms of the detail, have the event log where we have more detail, or sorry, coming back to that in the activity log, by assets, we can see the detail around those actions. So we can see, for example, if we have a success, we can see what's the output of the script, for example. So we can see the output of the script. Where we have a failure, you can see maybe error messages. In terms of the event logging, I have events for the vulnerability detection, mitigation events, application, identification, and so on. So we've got all of these events that we can generate. Now, the events in terms of centralized logging, which is what you were asking about, we have notifications that we can send via email in terms of vulnerability detection events, application detection events. But we also have integrations natively for Splunk or Sumo Logic for your SIM platforms, or we have syslog output for that centralized logging. But we also have an API. So we have a number of partners and customers who make use of the API, both to pull data and to push actions. For example, maybe pushing patching activities. So in terms of the centralized logging and reporting, well, logging, those are the key things. We also have native reporting within the platform in terms of flat file reporting on all of the activities that I've shown you. But we do also have a more advanced vAnalyzer tool, which gives a more dynamic graphical dashboard. So we've got different types of reporting depending on what your requirements are. And this is potentially vAnalyzer is where we go into more detail that may be required, the more advanced reporting. So we've got different options depending on requirements. In terms of the unmanaged devices, so hopefully I've answered most of your questions there, Lucas. What in terms of your governance frameworks that we align with. That overlaps somewhat, I think, with another question that we've had from Raymond, which around managing unmanaged devices, vulnerability assessment around unmanaged devices. And this is where we're really bringing into play our version 2. So our version 2 of vRx, which will be released early next year, we're releasing a network scanner, so vRadar. And what that will do is we'll have the ability there to perform full vulnerability scanning on those unmanaged devices, like your ESXi hosts, like your switches, your routers. Now, this also we have compliance components with it in. So for any UK customers, we have Cyber Essentials within that, Cyber Essentials Plus. We also have PCI, we have HIPAA for US, but we also have CIS. So we can do the full suite of CIS compliance checks. And those are the frameworks that we're initially starting with, along with additional vulnerability types of scans, web application scanning, container scanning, and so on. So our version 2 and the vRadar coming early next year, I think will be a real game changer. And that's something that I think a lot of you, I'm sure, will find very interesting in terms of extending the areas of functionality, in terms of extending and expanding beyond what we look at within vRx right now, which is essentially it's those managed agents. It's the Windows, it's the Mac, it's the Linux, it's those third-party apps. So Lucas, an interesting question. Hopefully I've answered your previous question, and Raymond hopefully covered yours as well. Lucas, interesting question. So I think the most valuable features of Vicarious are really in production. It's really it's about having that single pane of glass. It's an overused phrase, I think, single pane of glass, but it's the single view on understanding what's your vulnerabilities, what's the priority, and how do I fix them. Most tools, as I'm sure you've seen, you will end up focusing, what's my vulnerabilities, how do I fix them? Or you have remediation tools, but you may not have patching tools, you may not have visibility into the vulnerabilities. It's that single workflow and pane of glass in terms of visibility. And in terms of the target environment in achieving the right balance between automation and governance, I would always say best practice, you still need to be doing testing of patching. With the best will in the world, some patches may be problematic. You should always, best practice, do some testing. There will be some applications that, and you will know better than I do, in your environment, which systems can you automatically patch, which systems can't you, which applications can you automatically patch, which ones can't you. So it's a balancing act, and always will be, always has been. I've sold patching tools more than 20 years ago, and it's always been the same. It's a fine line, and it's ensuring an understanding of the environment to get that right balance on the automation, and what can you automate, what can't you automate. So hopefully, I'm not sure whether there's any more questions, but I think we're probably just about coming up to the end of the session. So I don't see any more questions at the moment, but hopefully I've given you a good little taster there for vRx, and some ideas about what we can do in terms of simplifying and reducing what you need to do day in, day out, in terms of the vulnerability assessment, in terms of prioritization, in terms of the remediation. Now, what I can do and what we can do is we can Jim, you're absolutely right. So yeah, you are absolutely right, Jim. I do what I say, not what I do. And I should actually be restarting my browser. So yes, you are correct and well spotted. Yes, we could use it to patch. However, it would, of course, terminate the session. So I'd probably best not do that until we're ready to wrap up. But yeah, what I was going to say was, if you do want to have a more in-depth dive into the platform, we can very easily set up a longer demo to spend a little more time over this with the team. And we can do that demo. We can also very easily set up proof of concepts for you and work with you on that. Lucas, so non-technical question, not a problem. In terms of licensing, we keep it really simple. So the vRx platform is licensed on a number of managed agents. So where we have the Windows, Mac, Linux, we don't differentiate. Servers, workstations, we don't differentiate. Numbers of administrators, we don't differentiate. The exceptions to that are where we have the advanced reporting. So that's a separate module, the vAnalyzer, and also the network scanning, the compliance checks. Those will be licensed separately, but those are something that we can certainly sort out with you. And in terms of putting you in touch with the sales team, Lucas, that's absolutely something that we can do for you. So another question there from Hilton. So in terms of management console, we have the single dashboard that is not currently customizable. We do have plans that we will allow this dashboard to be customizable. We have the different dashboards covering different areas, so the application or the operating system or the assets or the vulnerabilities. So we've got those different areas. In terms of managing multiple customers, so if you're coming from an MSSP perspective or an MSP perspective, we do have the ability to provide multiple dashboards for each of your customers. So there's absolutely no problem with that. And hopefully that's answered your question, Hilton. If it hasn't, drop me an email and we can have a quick call at some point. But yeah, hopefully you've all found that helpful and really useful. And as I say, we're more than happy to take this further. We can set up further sessions, either with me and Amir, or with respective teams around the world. And we can set up demos, and yeah, we can work with you as needed. And I think on that, I've overrun by a few minutes, but I'm sure that's not a problem. With that, I will bid you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and hope you have a great time. And thank you all for your time today.
Soon the alerts will start, and the thing that'll make them ring is the exploit that you'll bring right within your core. It's beginning to look a lot like a data breach. Phishing links in every email, but the prettiest sight to see is the MFA that will be on your own laptop. Sure, it's a data breach once more.